discuss at least 3 types of delay on projects, and there is a 4th type of delay that is almost always argued, although not frequently listed in the contract definition. So, Patrick, why don't you walk us through the types of delays that are typically discussed in most construction contracts?
Sure thing, can do. The first type that you're going to run into on construction projects is the inexcusable delay. And there are really 2 conditions that constitute an inexcusable delay. And the first is that the delay is caused by a contractor, or one of the contractor's sub-suppliers and vendors. Meaning that, you know, the contractor themselves or one of the entities that are under the direct control of the contractor. And then the second condition there is the end date of the schedule has to be impacted. And that's kind of an important part of the condition. And I know Jim's going to go into this a little more detail later, but the critical path, and I would say probably more specifically the longest path, needs to be impacted by these delays in order for it to be an inexcusable delay. You know, typically you're talking about things like failure to properly man the project. It's a very common one that we run into when we're doing schedule analysis. You're looking at sort of a generalized, non-specific production delay across the schedules, and you're starting to get the idea after doing some further analysis of manpower that the project was not properly manned. Failure to coordinate equipment, material deliveries, failure to provide submittals in a timely manner, and then generalized project mismanagement. There's also an issue as far as whether a delay was foreseeable at the time of the bid, and that's sort of an additional type of delay where it's something that perhaps the contractor should have understood. It was you know, there in the documents and would have been evident to someone reasonably looking at those documents, but ultimately did not incorporate that into their plan.
Well, it goes one step further than that, Patrick.
Okay.
You all have been in the business long enough, I presume, to remember when the Chinese were buying all the steel in the world to build the Beijing Olympics. And there was a shortage of steel because the Chinese were paying big dollars to build all those wonderful facilities over there for the Olympics. And a lot of people knew about this. I mean, it was commonly discussed in the press and everything else. And when highway contractors, after this really hit the U.S., were delayed by not being able to obtain the necessary steel for their projects, they started filing claims. And in this case, they were force majeure type claims, sort of thing. And the U.S. Department of Transportation reminded us of a court case that goes back, I don't know, 30 years or something like that, that if the delay you're encountering now was reasonably foreseeable by anybody in the industry, that it wasn't excusable because you should have foreseen it. And the bottom line that the Secretary of Transportation put out a policy memo that flowed to every one of the highway departments across the country that if you bid on or after a certain date, and I'm not sure exactly how they picked that date, but they did, and you're trying to prosecute a delay because of the lack of shortage of steel, that was foreseeable. Everybody in the industry knew about it. And so it really goes beyond what's in the documents. It's what you knew or should have known as I guess a reasonably intelligent bidder, I suppose, is the test they're talking about. And then, you know, and that doesn't come up very often. But it did hit a lot of people right between the eyes not that many years ago. All right. Sorry, Patrick. I want to get back to excusable delay, please.
Of course. Excusable delay is typically driven by an unforeseeable event caused by a third party or a delay beyond the control and without the fault or negligence of the contractor. And this includes agents, sub-suppliers, and vendors at any tier. And then again, the end date of the schedule also has to be impacted, and that the criticality of these issues is important. The fact that something might have occurred later than originally planned is not the same thing as saying that it was a critical path delay. We have some examples up there: acts of God, force majeure work, fires, strikes, acts of government, acts of war, freight embargoes. things along the lines of, I know that in a lot of contracts that I've worked on, the contract actually delineates that a third-party utility entity, such as Verizon or whatever, whoever's duct banks you're disturbing as you're beginning your excavation, is at least under that contract defined as an excusable delay, but because it's caused by a third party, is ultimately non-compensable, which leads into actually the next type, which is the compensable delay, which is unforeseeable delays caused by the owner or agents, or the owner's agents, or delay caused by a situation for which the owner has assumed contractual liability. In that example I just gave, the owner had expressly not assumed contractual liability for the utility duct banks that that a third-party utility would hold, and that's why that's non-compensable. But the compensable delay is things that the owner has assumed contractual responsibility for. And of course, again, the end date of the schedule has to be impacted. So in this sort of thing, you're talking about change orders, delayed responses to RFIs that, again, ultimately impact the schedule end date, parallel prime contract delays on presumably on a multi-prime contract where those things are canceling each other out, work suspensions, differing site conditions.